The CEO hired a girlfriend to fool his family, but she ended up winning their hearts completely. The 52nd floor of Young Enterprises gleamed like a crystal palace in the late afternoon sun. Violet Rose stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, momentarily forgetting why she'd been summoned to the CEO's office. Below her, Manhattan stretched out like a glittering tapestry, but it wasn't the cityscape that had captured her attention. It was the massive Monet hanging on the wall beside her. "Water lilies," she whispered, reaching out but stopping just short of touching the canvas. The brushstrokes seemed to dance in the golden light, creating ripples that nearly moved before her eyes. In her 5 years as an art curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, she'd seen countless masterpieces, but there was something different about viewing one in such an intimate setting. Most people who come to this office spend more time staring at the view than the art, a deep voice remarked from behind her. Violet spun around, her cheeks flushing. Noah Young stood in the doorway of his office, his 6'2" frame cutting an impressive silhouette against the mahogany panels behind him. At 32, he was the youngest CEO in New York's financial sector, and the papers never tired of running stories about the eligible bachelor who'd turned his father's investment firm into a global powerhouse. "Mr. Young," Violet straightened her simple black dress, suddenly aware of every wrinkle. "I apologize, I was just appreciating Monet's genius." He moved into the room with the fluid grace of a man completely at ease in his domain. "Please, sit. And it's Noah." Violet sank into one of the leather chairs facing his desk, her mind racing. The email requesting her presence had been vague, something about a potential private acquisition for the Young family collection. As the Met's youngest senior curator, she'd handled several high-profile purchases, but never one that required a personal meeting with a CEO. Noah didn't sit behind his desk as she expected. Instead, he chose the chair next to her, turning it slightly so they faced each other. Up close, she could see the faint shadows under his steel-grey eyes, the slight loosening of his pristine blue tie. Despite his composed exterior, something was weighing on him. "Would you like coffee?" he asked, gesturing to an elaborate espresso machine that probably cost more than her annual salary. "Yes, thank you," she replied, if only to give her hands something to do. He rose and prepared 2 cups himself, surprising her. The gossip blogs painted him as someone who probably had an assistant to breathe for him. "1 sugar, no cream," he said, handing her a cup. "I remembered from the museum gala last month." Violet accepted the coffee, startled that he'd noticed such a detail at an event where he'd been surrounded by New York's elite. She'd only been there as part of the museum's staff, hovering on the periphery while discussing artwork with interested donors. Ms. Rose, "Violet, please." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Violet, what I'm about to propose isn't about art. At least, not directly." She set her coffee down, tension creeping into her shoulders. "I don't understand." Noah leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. For the first time, his carefully maintained facade cracked, showing something raw underneath. "My grandmother is dying." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken emotion. "She has lymphoma," he continued, his voice tight. "The doctors say she has 6 months, maybe less. She's the woman who raised me after my parents died, who built this company from nothing with my grandfather, and her last wish." He paused, running a hand through his dark hair in a rare display of frustration. "Her last wish is to see me happy and settled down." Violet's heart squeezed with sympathy, but confusion clouded her features. "I'm very sorry, but I don't see what this has to do with me." Noah stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "I need someone to pretend to be my girlfriend." The words didn't register at first. When they did, Violet almost laughed, thinking it was a joke, but the serious set of his shoulders told her otherwise. "You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend?" She stood as well, her legs unsteady. "Why me? Surely there are countless women who would—" "That's exactly why it can't be them." He turned back to face her, his expression intense. "I need someone real, someone who won't try to turn this into a reality show. Someone intelligent, cultured, and capable of handling my family's social circle without being dazzled by it." He gestured to the Monet. "Someone who sees beauty in the art, not the price tag." Violet's mind spun. This is insane. $500,000 for 6 months of your time. The figure hit her like a physical blow. Images flashed through her mind. Her sister Amy in the hospital, the mounting medical bills, the experimental treatment they couldn't afford, the treatment that could save her life. What exactly would this entail? She heard herself asking, even as her rational mind screamed at her to run. Attending family functions, charity events, being seen together in public occasionally, making my grandmother's last months happy ones. He moved closer, his expression softening. "I've done my research, Violet. I know about your sister's condition. This could help both of us." Anger flared in her chest. "You looked into my personal life?" "I look into everything." He didn't apologize. "But I chose you before I knew about Amy. I chose you because at that gala, when everyone else was networking and taking selfies, you spent 20 minutes explaining the significance of brush techniques to my 12-year-old sister, Sarah. You didn't know she was a young. You were just kind." The anger faded as quickly as it had come, replaced by a complicated mix of emotions she couldn't name. When would this start? "Immediately. There's a family dinner this weekend at the estate in the Hamptons." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. "The contract is in here, along with the first payment. Take it home, read it over, have your lawyer look at it." Violet's fingers trembled as she took the envelope. "I haven't said yes." "But you will." It wasn't arrogance in his voice, it was understanding. "Because you'd do anything to save your sister, just like I'd do anything for my grandmother." Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. A recognition of kindred spirits, both willing to cross lines for family. "One condition," Violet said, squaring her shoulders. Noah raised an eyebrow. "Name it." "I want to know the real you, not the CEO, not the public figure. If I'm going to convince your family we're in love, I need to know who you are behind all—" She gestured to his office, his perfectly tailored suit, his carefully constructed image. For a long moment he stared at her. Then slowly, that ghost of a smile returned, warmer this time. "Deal!" He held out his hand. Violet took it, his palm warm against hers. "Deal!" As they shook hands, the late afternoon sun caught the Monet just right, sending prismatic colors dancing across their joined hands. Neither of them noticed that they held on a moment too long, or that their lives had just changed irrevocably in ways neither could predict. Little did they know that this business arrangement would spark a chain of events that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, family, and the fine line between pretense and reality. 2. Meeting the matriarch. The young family estate loomed before them like something out of a fairy tale. Violet pressed her forehead against the cool window of Noah's Bentley as they drove through wrought-iron gates and up a winding driveway lined with blooming cherry trees. Pink petals drifted through the April air like snow, creating a dreamlike scene that did nothing to calm her nerves. "Remember what we practiced," Noah said softly beside her. His hand found hers, warm and steady. After a week of intensive relationship training, these small touches had become almost natural. Almost. "We met at the museum gala," Violet recited, but we'd been crossing paths at art events for months. You finally asked me to dinner after you corrected my interpretation of Van Gogh's technique," he finished, a genuine smile playing at his lips. "At least, that part's true." The car crunched to a stop on the circular driveway. Violet's grip tightened on Noah's hand as she took in the Georgian mansion with its perfect symmetry and climbing roses. "Your childhood home is bigger than my entire apartment building," says the woman who handles million-dollar art acquisitions for a living. Noah's thumb traced soothing circles on her palm. "You've got this, Violet. Just be yourself." "The version of myself that's madly in love with you?" She meant it to sound teasing, but vulnerability crept into her voice. Noah turned to face her fully, his grey eyes intense. "The version of yourself that made my sister Sarah light up talking about art, the one who notices beauty in unexpected places. That's the woman my family will love." Before Violet could respond, the massive front doors swung open. A petite woman with silver-streaked dark hair hurried down the steps, her face glowing with excitement. "They're here!" Grace Young called over her shoulder into the house. "Noah, darling, you're late!" "Sorry, Mom," Noah murmured as they exited the car. "Traffic on the Long Island Expressway was terrible." Grace barely acknowledged his excuse, her attention fixed entirely on Violet. "And you must be the mysterious girlfriend we've heard so little about." There was a hint of reproach in her tone, aimed at her son. "Violet Rose," she introduced herself, extending her hand. Grace ignored it completely, pulling her into a warm embrace instead. "We don't shake hands in this family, dear. Now come inside. Everyone's dying to meet you, especially Eleanor." Violet felt Noah tense beside her at the mention of his grandmother. She squeezed his hand, offering silent support as they followed Grace into the house. The interior was a perfect blend of old money and lived-in comfort. Persian rugs softened marble floors, and family photos shared wall space with what appeared to be original Renoir. Violet's curator's eye identified at least 3 pieces that belonged in museums, but her attention was drawn to the candid photographs: a young Noah learning to ride a bike, teenage Noah at a piano recital, Noah in cap and gown with his arm around a frail but elegant woman who could only be Eleanor Young. "Mum, where's Gran?" Noah asked as they moved through the house. "In the conservatory, darling. She insisted on having her afternoon tea there, said the light was better." They entered a vast glass-enclosed space filled with exotic plants and comfortable wicker furniture. Sunlight streamed through the panels, creating patterns on the tile floor. And there, like a queen holding court, sat Eleanor Young. Time had clearly taken its toll on the family matriarch, but nothing could diminish the regal bearing that seemed bred into her bones. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed, her silk blouse and tailored slacks immaculate. The wheelchair she sat in looked more like a throne. "So," Eleanor said, her voice stronger than Violet expected, "this is the woman who's been keeping my grandson too busy to visit his dying grandmother." "Gran," Noah started, but Eleanor waved him off with an elegant hand. "Let the girl speak for herself, Noah. You always did try to fight other people's battles." Violet felt Noah's anxiety radiating off him in waves. This was the moment everything hinged on. Eleanor's approval, or lack thereof, would set the tone for their entire charade. She thought of the practiced answers they'd prepared, the careful story they'd constructed. Instead, she found herself walking forward and kneeling beside Eleanor's wheelchair. "Actually, Mrs. Young," she said softly, "I've been encouraging him to visit more. But you know how stubborn he can be when he's worried about showing vulnerability." Eleanor's sharp eyes narrowed slightly, studying Violet's face. Behind her, she heard Noah's sharp intake of breath at her deviation from their script. "He gets that from his grandfather," Eleanor said finally. "That man wouldn't admit he was dying until the very end. insisted on going to board meetings even when he could barely stand. Her expression softened with memory. "And please, call me Gran. Everyone does." "Thank you, Gran." Violet smiled, noticing for the first time that Eleanor's eyes were the exact same shade of grey as Noah's. "Now tell me," Eleanor continued, gesturing for Violet to take the chair beside her, "what made you fall in love with my workaholic grandson? And don't give me that rehearsed nonsense about the museum gala. I want the truth." Violet's heart stuttered. She glanced at Noah, who had settled into a chair across from them, his face unreadable. The truth. What was the truth when everything was built on a lie? But as she looked at him, really looked at him, she realized there were truths she could tell. "It was his hands," she said quietly. Eleanor's eyebrows rose. "His hands?" "Yes. The first time I really noticed him, he was explaining a Degas sculpture to his sister Sarah at the museum. Most people just look at art, but he was teaching her to see it with his hands, tracing the lines in the air, showing how the dancer's pose created movement in stillness." Violet smiled at the memory. "He didn't know I was watching. There was no performance to it, no attempt to show off his knowledge, just a brother sharing something beautiful with his sister." A heavy silence fell over the conservatory. Violet could feel Noah's eyes on her, but didn't dare look at him. She hadn't told him about witnessing that moment with Sarah, hadn't told anyone. Eleanor reached out and took Violet's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "My dear," she said, "that's exactly what I wanted to hear." She turned to Noah. "This one's different, isn't she?" Noah cleared his throat. "Yes, Gran." "She is?" "Good." Eleanor straightened in her wheelchair. "Because I have 6 months left to plan a wedding, and I won't have my grandson settling for anything less than real love." The colour drained from both Noah and Violet's faces. "Gran," Noah started, but was again cut off by his grandmother's imperious wave. I know, it's too soon to talk about marriage, but a dying woman is allowed her dreams, isn't she?" She patted Violet's hand. "Now tell me about your work at the Met. I understand you've been revolutionizing their contemporary collection." As Violet launched into a discussion about recent acquisitions, she felt Noah's gaze burning into her. When she finally chanced to look at him, the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. He was looking at her like he'd never seen her before, like she was a masterpiece he was only now learning to truly see. Later, as they prepared to join the rest of the family for dinner, Noah pulled her aside in a quiet hallway. "That story about my hands," he said softly. "About Sarah and the Degas, was that true?" Violet met his eyes steadily. "Every word. Why didn't you tell me before?" "Some things you can't rehearse, Noah." She reached up and straightened his tie, allowing her fingers to linger for a moment. "Sometimes the best lies are wrapped in truth." He caught her hand before she could pull away, holding it against his chest. Violet could feel his heart beating rapidly beneath his crisp shirt. "Violet," he began, but was interrupted by Sarah's voice calling them to dinner. The moment broke, but something had shifted between them, something that no amount of contract negotiations or rehearsed stories could have predicted. As they walked to the dining room, their hands found each other's automatically, and neither could tell if it was for show or something deeper. Eleanor Young watched them from her wheelchair, a knowing smile playing on her lips. She had seen many things in her long life, including more than a few pretenses, but she had also seen enough real love to recognize its first, tentative blooms, even if the lovers themselves didn't know it yet. Dear readers, before we dive into this emotionally charged chapter, we'd love to have you join our storytelling family. Subscribe to our channel to never miss our latest romantic tales, family dramas, and heart-touching moments. Together, let's explore the beautiful complexities of love, family, and the unexpected ways our hearts find their true paths. Welcome to our growing community of story lovers. 3. The Unexpected Ally. The Young Family Library was everything Violet's bookworm heart had ever dreamed of. 3 stories of floor-to-ceiling shelves stretched toward a glass dome ceiling where afternoon light filtered through in dusty golden beams. Rolling ladders attached to brass rails offered access to the highest volumes, and comfortable reading nooks were tucked into every corner. It was the kind of room that made you believe in magic. But at the moment, Violet couldn't appreciate any of it. She was too busy having a panic attack behind a shelf of first edition Dickens. "Breathe," she whispered to herself, pressing her forehead against the cool leather spines. "Just breathe." The morning had gone perfectly. Too perfectly. Eleanor had insisted on showing her every family photo album. Grace had asked for her opinion on redecorating the East Wing, and Noah's Uncle James had already invited her to join the family's annual yacht trip to the Greek islands. They weren't just accepting her, they were embracing her completely, and it was killing her. "You know, for someone who's supposedly madly in love with my brother, you look like you're about to throw up." Violet spun around so fast she nearly toppled the ladder behind her. Sarah Young stood at the end of the aisle, her arms crossed over her chest. At 16, she was a perfect blend of Noah's sharp features and Grace's delicate beauty, but it was the knowing look in her eyes that made Violet's blood run cold. "Sarah? I was just admiring the collection with your eyes closed." Sarah raised an eyebrow in a perfect imitation of her brother. "Try again." Violet opened her mouth to offer another excuse, but something in the teenager's expression made her pause. In the week she'd spent preparing for this weekend, Noah had talked about his sister constantly, how she was too smart for her own good, how she saw through everyone's pretenses, how she'd been the first to know about their parents' divorce before they even announced it. Making a decision she hoped she wouldn't regret, Violet sank into the nearest reading chair. "How long have you known?" Sarah's face lit up with triumph as she perched on the chair's arm. "Since dinner last night. You're good, really good, but you slipped up when Uncle James asked about Noah's morning routine." "What? How?" "You said he takes his coffee black with 1 sugar. Noah switched to green tea 3 months ago after his doctor said his blood pressure was too high." Sarah's smile was both sympathetic and slightly smug. "The real question is, why would my incredibly picky trust fund baby brother hire someone as genuine as you to play his girlfriend?" Violet's heart pounded. This wasn't part of the plan. None of this was in the contract. "Sarah, Relax," Sarah cut her off, her expression softening. "Your secret's safe with me, but I want to know everything, and I mean everything." For a long moment, Violet studied the girl before her. Despite her youth, there was a maturity in Sarah's eyes that spoke of someone who had grown up too fast, someone who understood the weight of family obligations and secrets. "Your grandmother," Violet said finally. "He's doing it for her, isn't he?" Sarah's smugness faded, replaced by something more vulnerable. "Gran's been asking him about settling down ever since her diagnosis. She's worried he'll end up alone, married to the company like Grandpa was before he met her." "And you're not angry about the deception?" "Are you kidding?" Sarah leaned forward, her eyes sparkling. "This is the most interesting thing that's happened in this family since Dad ran off with his yoga instructor. Besides ... She glanced toward the library door, where they could hear Noah's voice in the hallway, discussing quarterly reports on his phone. "I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you when you're not watching." Violet's chest tightened. "Sarah, this isn't... we're not Real? Sarah stood, smoothing her designer jeans. Maybe not yet, but I've read enough romance novels to know where this is going. She headed for the door, then paused. Just be careful with him, okay? Noah acts tough, but ever since our parents' divorce, he's had these walls up. I think you might be the first person who started to crack them. Before Violet could respond, Sarah was gone, leaving her alone with thousands of books and even more questions. She found herself walking through the library's aisles, trailing her fingers along the spines of ancient volumes. Near the philosophy section, she discovered a small reading alcove with a window seat overlooking the rose garden. A book lay open on the cushion, its pages marked with post-it notes in familiar handwriting. Picking it up, Violet recognized it as Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Noah's neat annotations filled the margins, thoughts on leadership, duty, and the nature of love. One passage was heavily underlined. Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together, but do so with all your heart. That was our father's copy. Violet jumped at Noah's voice. He stood in the alcove entrance, his suit jacket discarded, tie loosened, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. No, it's okay. He moved into the space, sitting beside her on the window seat. It was a tight fit, forcing their shoulders to touch. I come here sometimes when the pressure gets too much. Dad used to read to us here on Sunday afternoons. Before the divorce. Noah tensed slightly, then relaxed. Sarah told you. She might have figured out our arrangement. To her surprise, Noah laughed. Of course she did. That girl's too smart for all of us. He took the book from her hands, his fingers brushing hers. Are you okay? With her knowing? Violet turned to face him, suddenly very aware of how close they were. Shouldn't I be asking you that? This is your plan, your family, Our plan, he corrected softly. You're part of this now, Violet. Whatever happens, we're in it together. Something shifted in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Sunlight through the glass dome caught the gold flecks in Noah's eyes, making them look almost amber. Without thinking, Violet reached up and brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. Noah caught her hand, but instead of pulling away, he pressed a kiss to her palm. The gesture was so tender, so unrehearsed, that Violet felt tears prick at her eyes. Noah, she whispered, what are we doing? Before he could answer, voices echoed through the library. Grace calling them for lunch, Eleanor asking about afternoon tea plans, Sarah's knowing laugh. They separated quickly, but something had changed. As they walked to join the family, their hands found each other's again, fingers intertwining naturally, and this time neither of them was sure if it was for show. In the library's hushed silence, Marcus Aurelius's words seemed to hang in the air. Love the people with whom fate brings you together, but do so with all your heart. Sarah, watching from behind a shelf, smiled to herself. Sometimes the best stories were the ones where the characters didn't even know they were falling in love. Dear, cherished readers, your incredible support keeps these stories flowing. Join our storytelling family by subscribing, and let's continue discovering the magic of love together. Every like and follow helps us create more enchanting tales of romance and family bonds. 4. Family dinners and hidden feelings. The young family dining room could have intimidated a royal court. A crystal chandelier cast rainbow prisms across the 20-seat mahogany table, while oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors watched from gilded frames. But somehow the space felt warm, lived in, filled with the kind of comfortable chaos that only comes from years of family gatherings. More wine, dear? Grace Young asked, already reaching for Violet's glass. Oh, I shouldn't, Violet began, but Eleanor cut her off with a wave. Nonsense. The girl needs liquid courage to survive her first official young family dinner, especially with what's coming. The matriarch's eyes twinkled mysteriously. Noah, seated beside Violet, tensed. "Gran, what did you do?" "Nothing, darling. I simply invited a few people to join us." As if on cue, the butler appeared at the door. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrison have arrived, along with Miss Chen and Mr. Blake." Violet felt Noah's hand find hers under the table, squeezing tight. These weren't just any dinner guests. These were the power players of New York society, the people whose approval could make or break their charade. Anthony, Charlotte. Grace rose to greet the Harrisons. He, the head of the city's largest investment bank. She, the chairwoman of 3 major charity boards. And May, William, welcome. Violet recognized May Chen from finance magazines, the brilliant hedge fund manager who'd been linked to Noah in gossip columns last year. As for William Blake, his software company had recently merged with Young Enterprises in a deal worth billions. "Noah," May said warmly, her Chanel suit impeccable. "It's been too long." Her gaze slid to Violet, assessing. "And this must be the mysterious girlfriend we've all been hearing about." "Violet Rose," Noah said, his voice carrying a note of pride that didn't sound rehearsed. "The Met's finest curator and the woman who's completely changed my life." Under normal circumstances, such a declaration would have sounded overblown. But Noah delivered it with such quiet conviction that Violet felt her heart skip. Dinner proceeded like a carefully choreographed dance. Servants appeared and disappeared with military precision, presenting course after exquisite course. Conversation flowed as smoothly as the vintage wine, but Violet could feel the underlying current of curiosity, the subtle probing questions designed to test her authenticity. "Tell us, Violet." Charlotte Harrison leaned forward, pearl necklace gleaming. "How does someone in the arts world end up dating New York's most eligible bachelor?" Before Violet could recite their practice story, Noah surprised her by laughing. "Actually, she turned me down the first time I asked her out." All eyes turned to them. This wasn't part of their script. "Did she now?" William Blake raised an eyebrow. "Do tell." Noah's thumb traced patterns on Violet's palm under the table. "I made the mistake of trying to impress her with my knowledge of modern art, quoted some critique I'd read about a Basquiat piece." "Oh no," Sarah giggled. "Noah, you didn't." "Oh, he did." Violet found herself smiling at the memory. He was so confident, standing there in his perfect suit, completely butchering the interpretation. "In my defense," Noah protested, "the article was from a very reputable source." "The source was an AI art generator," Violet revealed, earning laughs from around the table. "I spent 20 minutes explaining why his analysis was completely wrong, and then—" She paused, realizing this part wasn't rehearsed. "And then," Noah continued seamlessly, "instead of being offended that she'd demolished my argument, I realized I'd never met anyone who cared that deeply about something, who wasn't afraid to stand up to me." His eyes met hers, full of something that made her breath catch. "I asked her to dinner right there, and she said no," Eleanor prompted, clearly enjoying the story. "I said he needed to learn about art for the right reasons, not just to impress people." Violet was surprised by how easily the words came. That if he wanted to understand Basquiat, he needed to understand the soul behind the chaos, not just the market value. "So what changed your mind?" May asked, her tone carefully neutral. Violet turned to Noah, finding unexpected truth in the moment. 2 weeks later, I was working late at the museum. There was a new installation being set up, and I found him sitting in front of an unfinished display, just looking. Not at his phone, not at documents, just really seeing the art. "You never told me you saw me there," Noah said softly. "You weren't performing for anyone," Violet replied, forgetting their audience. "You were just present, real." A weighted silence fell over the table. Violet became aware of Eleanor watching them with glistening eyes, of Sarah's knowing smile, of Grace dabbing at her cheeks with a napkin. The moment was broken by the arrival of dessert, individual soufflés that drew appreciative murmurs from the guests. As conversation turned to business matters, Violet felt Noah lean close. "That story," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear, "about finding me at the museum, was that true? Does it matter?" "Yes." Violet met his gaze, finding something vulnerable in those grey eyes. "Yes," she admitted. "It was true. Though I didn't know it would become part of our story." Noah's hand tightened on hers. "Maybe the best stories are the ones we don't plan." Later, as coffee was served in the drawing room, Violet excused herself to get some air. She found herself on the terrace, the spring night warm and fragrant with blooming jasmine. Behind her, she could hear laughter and music drifting through the open French doors. "He's different with you, you know." Violet turned to find Mei Chen joining her at the balustrade. Her heart sank. Surely Noah's former flame would see through their act. "I've known Noah since prep school," Mei continued, sipping her coffee. "He's always been controlled, calculated. Every move planned 10 steps ahead." She gave Violet a sidelong glance. "But the way he looks at you, that's not something you can choreograph." "Mei, you don't have to explain." Mei smiled, surprising her. "Just don't break his heart. Noah Young might seem invincible, but when he falls completely." Before Violet could respond, Noah appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay out here?" "Perfect," Mei said, patting Violet's arm as she passed. "Your girlfriend was just telling me about some fascinating restoration work at the Met. You're a lucky man, Noah." Left alone, Noah joined Violet at the railing. "What was that about?" "She was warning me not to break your heart." Violet tried to laugh, but it came out shaky. "Ironic, isn't it?" Noah was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the moonlit gardens. "Is it?" The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. Inside, Eleanor was regaling their guests with stories of Noah's childhood. Sarah was playing the piano, the notes of Chopin floating on the evening air. Everything felt dreamlike, suspended between reality and fantasy. "Noah," Violet started, but he shook his head. "Dance with me?" "What?" "Dance with me," he repeated, holding out his hand. "Sarah's playing Nocturne in E-flat major. It was my mother's favorite." And so they danced there on the moonlit terrace, with Sarah's piano and the scent of jasmine wrapping around them like silk. Noah held her closer than necessary for their performance, his cheek resting against her hair. "I'm starting to forget," he murmured. "Forget what?" "Which parts we're pretending?" Violet closed her eyes, letting herself sink into the moment, into the warmth of him, into the dangerous territory between fact and fiction. "Me too." From the drawing-room window, Eleanor watched them with knowing eyes, while Sarah's fingers moved across the keys, weaving music around the unfolding story of two people who had started with a lie and were stumbling, perhaps unknowingly, toward truth. Dear beloved readers, your wonderful support keeps our stories alive. Join our growing storytelling family by subscribing today. Together, let's explore more tales of love, destiny, and the beautiful moments that change lives forever. Every subscription helps us create more magical stories for you. The dance that changed everything. The Young family's annual charity gala transformed their already impressive ballroom into something from a fairy tale. Crystal-draped chandeliers cast starlight across the marble floors, while thousands of white roses and twinkling lights created the illusion of dancing in a garden of dreams. New York's elite moved through the space like exotic birds, their designer gowns and jewels catching the light with every turn. Violet stood before the full-length mirror in her assigned guest suite, hardly recognizing herself. The midnight blue gown Grace had insisted on buying her, every young woman needs a show-stopping dress, dear, made her feel like a princess, or perhaps a very convincing imposter. The silk creation hugged her curves before flowing into a dramatic skirt that seemed to float with every movement. Her dark hair was swept up elegantly, showing off the diamond droplet earrings Eleanor had pressed into her hands earlier. Family heirlooms, darling. They've been waiting for the right person. A soft knock at the door broke through her reverie. "Violet, are you ready? Come in, Sarah." The teenager bounded in, already dressed in a beautiful pale pink gown that made her look older than her 16 years. She stopped short when she saw Violet, her eyes widening. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed. "Noah's going to die when he sees you." Violet smoothed her hands over the dress nervously. "Is it too much? I feel like you're pretending to be someone you're not," Sarah finished, coming to stand beside her in the mirror. "Isn't that kind of the point?" "Sarah." Sorry. The girl grinned. "But seriously, you look incredible, and I'm not the only one who's going to think so." She pulled out her phone, showing Violet the society pages already buzzing about the mysterious woman who had captured Noah Young's heart. "Everyone's talking about you two, the ruthless CEO and the artistic soul who transformed him. It's like a movie." "A very expensive movie," Violet muttered, thinking of the contract locked in her apartment safe. "Maybe," Sarah conceded, "but the best movies are the ones where the actors forget their acting." She gave Violet a meaningful look. "Like when my brother can't take his eyes off you at breakfast, or when you automatically fix his tie before meetings, or when—" "Sarah," Violet's voice held a warning note. Fine, but you can't deny there's something real growing here. I've known Noah my whole life. He doesn't look at anyone the way he looks at you." Before Violet could respond, another knock came at the door. This time it was Grace, looking elegant in emerald green. "Violet, darling, are you ready? The guests are arriving and oh—" She stopped, pressing a hand to her heart. "Oh, my dear, you look absolutely perfect. The dress is beautiful, Grace. Thank you again. Nonsense." Grace waved away her thanks, but her eyes were suspiciously bright. "Now come along. Noah's waiting at the bottom of the stairs, and if I know my son, he's probably wearing a hole in the marble with his pacing." Sarah giggled. "He's such a control freak. This is probably killing him." "What is?" Violet asked as they moved into the hallway. "Not being able to plan every detail." Grace smiled knowingly. "Love has a way of destroying even the most carefully laid plans." Violet's protest died on her lips as they reached the top of the grand staircase. Below, the foyer buzzed with arriving guests, their voices creating a sophisticated hum. And there, at the bottom of the stairs, stood Noah. He was always handsome in his suits, but tonight he looked like something out of a magazine. His tuxedo fit him perfectly, and his dark hair was styled just enough to look effortlessly elegant. He was speaking with William Blake about something, gesturing with one hand, every inch the powerful CEO. Then he looked up and saw her. The change was immediate and profound. His sentence trailed off mid-word, his hand dropping to his side. The polished businessman vanished, replaced by something raw and real that made Violet's heart stop. Time seemed to slow as she descended the stairs, one hand trailing the banister. She was vaguely aware of phones capturing the moment, of whispered conversations and approving nods, but all she could see was Noah, watching her with an expression that couldn't possibly be part of their act. When she reached the bottom, he held out his hand. "You look—" He started, then shook his head. "There aren't words." "Try," she whispered, surprising herself with her boldness. Noah pulled her close, his lips brushing her ear. "Like every dream I never knew I had." Heat bloomed in her chest, spreading through her body like wildfire. This wasn't in their script. This wasn't part of their carefully constructed story. This was something else entirely. The orchestra began to play, and Noah led her to the center of the ballroom. Other couples joined them, but Violet barely noticed. As Noah's hand settled on her waist, pulling her closer than strictly necessary, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. "Dance with me?" he asked, though they were already moving. "We don't have to," she reminded him softly. "There's no family watching now. Everyone already believes we're in love." "Maybe I want to dance with you anyway." His grey eyes held hers, intense and honest. "Maybe I'm tired of pretending." "Noah!" Her voice trembled. "What are you saying?" He spun her out and pulled her back, closer than before. "I'm saying that somewhere between all the lies we've been telling everyone else, I started telling myself the truth." "And what truth is that?" Instead of answering, he kissed her. It wasn't a performance kiss, not the kind they'd practiced for public appearances. This was real, soft and searching and full of questions neither of them had dared to ask. Violet's hands slid up to his shoulders, steadying herself as the world tilted on its axis. When they finally parted, the orchestra had moved on to another song. Around them, couples danced and champagne flowed, but they remained frozen in their own private universe. "That wasn't in the contract," Violet managed to say. Noah's thumb traced her cheekbone. "Sue me." From across the room, Eleanor watched with satisfaction as her grandson held the woman he loved, really loved, not the manufactured version they thought they were presenting. Besides her, Grace wiped away tears. "They think they're so clever," Eleanor mused, "playing their little parts." "Should we tell them?" Grace asked. "Tell them what?" "That real love has a way of sneaking past all our careful defenses. That sometimes the heart knows what it wants before the mind catches up." Eleanor shook her head, smiling. "No, my dear, some things they need to figure out for themselves." Sarah, passing by with a stolen glass of champagne, couldn't resist adding, "Besides, it's way more fun watching them try to convince themselves they're still pretending." On the dance floor, Noah and Violet continued to sway, neither willing to be the first to pull away. The midnight blue of her dress blended with his black tuxedo like night meeting deeper night, and the diamonds at her ears caught the light with every movement. "We should probably stop," Violet whispered against his shoulder. "Probably," Noah agreed, pulling her closer. "People will talk. Let them." And so they danced, wrapped in their own world of crystal light and unspoken truths, while New York's elite watched and whispered and smiled knowingly, because some lies, it seemed, had a way of dancing themselves into truth. Chapter 6. Crisis of Heart. The moment Violet stepped into Noah's office, she felt the weight of everything they had built and everything they stood to lose, pressing down on her. The office, bathed in the golden glow of the late afternoon sun, had once seemed an intimidating symbol of Noah's power and influence. Now, it felt like a battleground for her heart. Noah stood by the window, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed on the cityscape as if it held the answers to the chaos between them. He didn't turn when she entered, but his voice was low and steady when he finally spoke. "The contract ends next week," he said, not looking at her. "You came to remind me, didn't you?" Violet hesitated, clutching her bag tightly. The contract was there, its crisp edges cutting into her palm like a reminder of their carefully constructed charade. "I thought we should talk about what happens next," she said cautiously. Noah turned then, his grey eyes piercing, his expression unreadable. "What happens next?" He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "That's the question, isn't it?" She shifted uncomfortably, her carefully rehearsed words slipping away under the intensity of his gaze. "Your grandmother is doing better. The family believes in us. We've done what we set out to do." "No," he interrupted, his voice firm but not angry. "You're reducing this to a deal, to some checklist of objectives we've met. But this—" He gestured between them, his hand trembling slightly. This stopped being a deal a long time ago. Violet's heart thudded painfully in her chest. "Noah!" "Don't," he said sharply, taking a step closer. "Don't brush this off, Violet. Not after everything we've been through. Not after what we've felt." She looked away, unable to meet his eyes. "I don't know what's real anymore. This started as a lie, and now I can't tell where the lie ends and the truth begins." "Then let me make it simple for you," Noah said, his voice breaking slightly. "I love you." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Violet's breath caught, her fingers clutching the strap of her bag so tightly it hurt. "You don't mean that," she whispered, shaking her head. "Don't tell me how I feel," he said, his tone soft but firm. "You've seen through every mask I've ever worn, Violet. You know me better than anyone else ever has. And I know you feel it too." Her defenses crumbled further with every word he spoke. "Even if I do," she said, her voice trembling, "how can we build something real on a foundation of lies?" "Because the lies brought us here," he said, stepping closer until he was just a breath away. "And the truth is that I love you, and I think you love me too." Tears blurred her vision, and she turned away, walking toward the window. She needed air, space, anything to stop the walls from closing in. "You don't understand, Noah. I've been burned before. I've been lied to, used." I'm not them," he said quietly, cutting through her panic. "And I'm not asking you to leap into this blindly. I'm asking you to let me in, to stop running." She closed her eyes, her hands trembling at her sides. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I'm scared of what this means, of what it could do to us if we get it wrong." "So am I," he said, moving to stand beside her. "But I'd rather face that fear with you than live without you." She looked up at him, her tears falling freely now. His eyes, so full of vulnerability and love, broke through the last of her defenses. But the fear was still there, a shadow she couldn't ignore. "I need time," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to figure out what's real and what's not." Noah nodded slowly, the pain in his eyes clear but tempered by understanding. "Take all the time you need," he said softly. "But promise me one thing." "What?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Promise me you won't shut me out," he said, his hand reaching for hers. His touch was warm, steady, grounding. "Whatever you decide, don't walk away from this without knowing the truth." She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The weight of his hand in hers felt like both an anchor and a lifeline, and she wasn't sure whether she wanted to cling to it or let go. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely audible, "for not shutting me out." Violet gave him a small, shaky smile. "I'll see you soon." As she walked out of the office, the crisp envelope in her bag felt heavier than ever. The storm inside her was far from settled, but for the first time she felt a glimmer of clarity, because as much as she wanted to run, as much as she wanted to protect her heart, one truth remained undeniable. She couldn't imagine her life without him. Aftermath. Noah stood by the window long after Violet had gone, his hands shoved into his pockets as he stared out at the city below. He'd taken risks before, calculated moves in business, high-stakes decisions that could make or break his empire, but nothing had ever felt as uncertain, as terrifying, as baring his heart to Violet. The words "I love you" echoed in his mind, a truth he'd known for weeks, but hadn't dared to admit. Now that it was out in the open, he felt both relieved and exposed, as if he'd handed her the power to break him. He didn't regret it. No matter what happened, he knew he couldn't go back to pretending. Not with her. Meanwhile, Violet sat on the steps of her apartment building, staring at the envelope in her lap. The contract inside was supposed to define the boundaries of their arrangement, but it felt meaningless now. Everything about their relationship had transcended those neat little lines, leaving her to navigate the uncharted territory of her own heart. With a deep breath, she pulled out her phone and typed a message. Violet. Noah, I don't know where this is going, but I don't want to lose what we have. Let's talk soon. She hesitated for a moment before hitting send, her heart pounding in her chest. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope, not just for clarity, but for something real, something worth fighting for. As the city buzzed around her, Violet realized that sometimes the hardest battles weren't against others, but against the fears we carried within ourselves, and for the first time, she was ready to face them. Chapter 7. Truth and Consequences. The young family's parlor, usually a warm and inviting space, felt suffocating as Noah stood before his grandmother. The truth, which he had been avoiding for weeks, now hung between them, heavy and undeniable. Eleanor Young, seated in her favorite armchair with her ever-present tea, had a way of commanding the room without raising her voice, and today was no exception. You paid her. Eleanor's voice was quiet, but carried an edge sharp enough to cut through steel. Her grey eyes, so much like Noah's, fixed him with an intensity that made him feel like a child caught sneaking cookies before dinner. Noah cleared his throat, standing taller. Gran, please let me explain. Eleanor raised a hand, silencing him. Oh, I understand perfectly, she said, her lips curving into an unexpected smile. You paid for a girlfriend but found love instead. That's worth every penny. Noah blinked, caught off guard. You're not angry? Why should I be angry? Eleanor sipped her tea, her demeanor almost amused. You were desperate to make me happy. That much is clear, and while I don't approve of deception, I can't fault the results. Noah glanced at Violet, who sat on the sofa beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had insisted on being here when he told Eleanor the truth, even though he'd begged her to let him handle it alone. Now she looked as though she wished she could disappear. Gran, it wasn't just about you, Noah admitted. I didn't realize it at first, but I was lonely. I thought this arrangement would solve my problems without getting too complicated. I didn't expect to fall in love, Eleanor finished, raising an eyebrow. Noah nodded, his throat tight. Yes. Eleanor set her teacup down with deliberate care. Well, my dear, love has a way of sneaking up on us when we least expect it. But that doesn't mean it's not real. Violet finally found her voice, her tone apologetic. Mrs. Young, I'm so sorry for deceiving you. I never meant to hurt anyone. When Noah approached me, I thought it would be a simple business arrangement. I never imagined that you'd fall for my grandson. Eleanor's smile softened as she turned her gaze to Violet. I may be old, but I'm not blind, dear. I've seen the way you two look at each other. Whatever this started as, it's clear that it's become something much more. Violet's cheeks flushed, and she looked down at her hands. I was afraid you'd never forgive me. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. I'm not the one you need forgiveness from, Violet. If what you two have is real, then the only thing that matters is that you forgive yourselves and each other. The words hung in the air, resonating deeply. Noah reached for Violet's hand, his grip firm and reassuring. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears, and saw the same vulnerability reflected in his gaze. Gran, Noah said after a moment, his voice steady, thank you for understanding. But there's something else I need to say. Eleanor tilted her head, curiosity flickering across her face. Oh? I'm not just in love with Violet, he said, his grip on her hand tightening. I want to build a life with her. No contracts, no pretending, just us. And I want your blessing. Violet's breath hitched, her heart pounding as she turned to look at him. Noah, you don't have to. Yes, I do, he interrupted, his voice firm. You deserve nothing less. Eleanor studied them for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, To their surprise, she stood, moving toward them with surprising grace for her frail frame. She placed a hand on each of their shoulders, her eyes warm and filled with emotion. "You have my blessing," she said softly. "Not because I approve of how this started, but because I see how it's ending, and I believe in second chances." Violet felt a tear slip down her cheek, and she reached up to hug Eleanor, overwhelmed by her kindness. Noah followed, wrapping both women in his arms, and for a moment the weight of their secrets and fears seemed to lift. When they finally pulled apart, Eleanor's sharp wit returned. "Now, I suppose you'll be planning a wedding soon. Don't think I'll let you get away with anything small." Noah chuckled, relief and joy evident on his face. "Wouldn't dream of it, Gran." "And Violet," Eleanor added, turning to her with a glint of mischief in her eye, "don't let this one boss you around too much. He gets that from his grandfather." Violet laughed through her tears, nodding. "I'll do my best." As they left the parlor, hand in hand, Noah and Violet felt the weight of their past mistakes lifting. They still had challenges ahead, but for the first time, they faced them together, knowing that their love, imperfect and unexpected, was worth fighting for. Behind them, Eleanor watched with a satisfied smile. "Young love," she murmured, reaching for her tea. "It's always a mess, but it's the most beautiful mess of all." Chapter 8. Healing Hearts. The gallery was quiet, the soft hum of distant conversations a comforting backdrop as Violet stood in front of the Monet. The strokes of blues and greens seemed alive under the golden light, as though the ripples of water lilies were captured in eternal motion. This painting, this room, was where it all began. And now, it felt like the only place she could confront the storm in her heart. The contract money had paid for Amy's surgery. Her sister was on the mend, her laughter returning to the house in a way that filled Violet with relief and gratitude. But even as her sister's life regained its light, Violet's heart remained heavy. She traced the air just shy of the painting's surface, her fingers mimicking the curve of Monet's strokes. The imperfections in the brushwork, the way the colors bled into one another. It was chaos and harmony all at once, much like her journey with Noah. "You know," came a familiar voice from behind her, low and steady. "I never told you why I really chose you." Her heart leapt at the sound, and she closed her eyes for a brief moment, steadying herself. "Noah," she said softly, turning to face him. He stood in the doorway, his hands in his pockets, his expression both tentative and determined. "Why did you?" she asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and trepidation. He stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "Because when you looked at this painting, you didn't see a price tag. You didn't see an investment. You saw beauty in the imperfections." His eyes softened, his voice dipping lower. "And just like this painting, our story started messy, tangled in lies and uncertainty. But you saw the beauty in it, in us, even when I didn't know it was there." Her chest tightened, and she looked away, back at the painting. "Noah, I wanted to believe that. But when the truth came out about the contract, about how it all started, I couldn't help but question if what we had was real." He moved closer, standing beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. "I questioned it too," he admitted. "At first I thought it was just part of the arrangement, but then, somewhere along the way, it stopped being about the plan. It became about you." Her throat tightened, and she shook her head. "How do I know this isn't just another beautiful lie? That I won't wake up one day and realize I built my life on something that was never meant to last?" Noah exhaled deeply, his hands falling to his sides. "Because I'm standing here, Violet. I'm standing here, not as the CEO who made you an offer, not as the man who tried to control everything in his life. I'm standing here as someone who's terrified, who's been broken open by you, and who's willing to risk everything for the chance to prove that this is real." Violet's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. "It's not that simple, Noah. Love isn't just about grand gestures or words. It's about trust, about letting yourself be vulnerable even when it scares you. I know, he said, his voice steady, and I'll spend every day proving that you can trust me, that you can be vulnerable with me, because you're the one thing in my life that's worth letting go of control for. Her tears finally broke free, sliding silently down her cheeks. She turned to him fully, searching his face for any sign of hesitation, of doubt. But all she saw was sincerity, a raw honesty that matched the chaos and beauty of the Monet behind them. "Noah," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I'm scared." "So am I," he said, stepping closer and taking her hands in his. "But maybe that's what makes it worth it. Maybe the best things in life are the ones that terrify us." She looked down at their joined hands, the warmth of his touch grounding her. "You really mean it, don't you?" "Every word," he said without hesitation. "I love you, Violet. Not the idea of you, not the role you played, but you. The woman who sees beauty in the imperfections, the woman who makes me want to be better, not for anyone else, but for myself." Her tears came harder now, but they weren't just tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of release, of hope. "I love you too," she said, her voice breaking. "I think I always have, even when I tried to convince myself otherwise." Noah's expression softened, and he cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away her tears. "Then let's stop trying to convince ourselves and just be." She nodded, leaning into his touch, her heart finally settling into a steady rhythm. "No more contracts, no more pretending, no more lies," he agreed, his voice full of promise. As their lips met in a kiss, it was different from every kiss that had come before. It wasn't part of a performance or a carefully crafted story. It was real, messy, imperfect, and full of the kind of raw emotion that made life worth living. When they finally pulled apart, Noah smiled, his forehead resting against hers. "You know," he said softly, "I think Monet would approve of us." Violet laughed through her tears, the sound light and free. "Why's that?" "Because, like his painting, we're not perfect," he said, his smile widening, "but we're beautiful anyway." And as they stood together in front of the masterpiece that had unknowingly brought them together, Violet realized that healing wasn't about erasing the scars or rewriting the past. It was about finding the courage to embrace the imperfections and create something beautiful from them, just like Monet had, and just like they would. Chapter 9. A real beginning. The young family estate in the Hamptons was alive with laughter and joy as the engagement dinner reached its crescendo. The grand dining hall, decked with fragrant blooms and soft candlelight, felt warm and intimate despite its size. For the first time in years, the gathering wasn't about business deals or keeping up appearances. It was about love. Violet sat beside Noah at the head of the table, her hand clasped firmly in his under the polished mahogany. The golden ring on her finger felt heavier than it should, not because of its size, but because of the significance it carried. This was real, every laugh, every toast, every warm glance from his family. The last year had been anything but easy, but tonight it all felt worth it. "To think," Eleanor said, raising her champagne flute with a twinkle in her eye, "I had to nearly die to get my grandson to find true love." "Gran!" came the collective exclamation, accompanied by groans and laughter. Eleanor simply winked, unrepentant. "What?" "It's true. I knew Noah needed a push. I just didn't realize it would take a Monet, a contract, and a remarkable woman to get him there." Noah shook his head, laughing softly as he leaned toward Violet. "She's impossible," he murmured. "And yet we love her anyway," Violet whispered back, smiling as Eleanor continued her speech. The past year had been a whirlwind. After the truth about their arrangement came to light, there had been moments of doubt and tension. But love, like Monet's brushstrokes, was chaotic and beautiful, and they had painted their way through the uncertainty, creating something uniquely theirs. Sarah stood up next, tapping her glass with her fork. At 17, she carried the same sharp wit and charm as her brother, though her tone was far lighter. "I just want to say on behalf of the younger generation of the Young family," she began, "that it's about time Noah settled down. Violet, we've all been waiting for someone brave enough to deal with him. Welcome to the family." The room erupted in laughter, and Violet felt her cheeks warm as she raised her glass to Sarah. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll do my best." "And I'll help," Sarah quipped, earning another round of laughter. Beside her, Grace dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, her smile radiant. "You've made this family so much." "A brighter Violet," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I always knew Noah would find someone incredible, but I never dreamed she'd fit in so perfectly." "Thank you, Grace," Violet said, her throat tight. "This family has been more welcoming than I ever imagined." Noah's hand tightened around hers, his thumb brushing soothing circles against her palm. She looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude and love. He mouthed, "I love you," and she smiled, mouthing it back. As the speeches wound down and the desserts were served, the buzz of conversation filled the room. Violet took a moment to soak it all in. The warm glow of the chandelier, the clink of glasses, the laughter of the people who had become her family. A year ago, she'd been a stranger at this table, playing a role. Now she belonged here, not because of a contract, but because of love. "You okay?" Noah asked softly, his voice breaking through her thoughts. She turned to him, her smile radiant. "More than okay," she said. "This feels right." "It is right," he said, lifting her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "And it's just the beginning." Eleanor's voice rose above the chatter again, drawing everyone's attention. "Now, if I may," she said, raising her glass one last time, "a toast. To Violet and Noah, a love that started with a lie but became the purest truth. May your life together be as bold and beautiful as Monet's finest masterpiece." "To Violet and Noah," the family chorused, glasses clinking and cheers ringing out. Violet felt Noah lean in closer, his breath warm against her ear. "Worth it," he whispered, his voice filled with conviction. She looked around the table, at Sarah giving her a thumbs up, at Grace wiping happy tears, at Eleanor beaming with pride, and at Noah, the man who had become her partner in every sense of the word. Her heart was full, her fears a distant memory. "Worth every moment," she agreed, her voice steady and full of love. Then, without hesitation, she leaned in and kissed him, right there in front of everyone. The room erupted into cheers and applause, and for once Violet didn't feel self-conscious. This was her family now, and Noah was her future. As they pulled apart, Noah rested his forehead against hers, his grey eyes sparkling with joy. "Ready for the next chapter?" "Always," Violet said, her smile wide, "as long as it's with you." And as the night continued, filled with laughter and love, Violet knew that sometimes the most beautiful stories didn't start perfectly. They started messy, uncertain, even with a lie. But with patience, honesty and love, they could turn into something extraordinary, a masterpiece in the making. And this was just the beginning. Dear readers, as we close this heartfelt journey together, we want to take a moment to thank each of you for your unwavering support and your willingness to lose yourself in this story of love, imperfection, and redemption. Your time, your emotions, and your connection to these characters mean the world. Each chapter came alive because of your belief in the power of love to transform even the most unexpected situations. This story wasn't just about Violet and Noah, it was about all of us. It's a reminder that life rarely unfolds the way we plan. Sometimes it begins with chaos, missteps, or even a lie. But it's not how a journey starts that defines it. It's the courage to embrace change, to face fears, and to let love grow that makes it truly beautiful. The moral of this story: love is not about perfection or pretending to have it all figured out. It's about accepting flaws in yourself and others and choosing to move forward despite the imperfections. True love is messy, challenging, and raw, but it's also breathtakingly honest and worth every risk. And perhaps most importantly, love is not just about two people finding each other. It's about bringing families, friendships, and entire worlds closer together. Thank you for your faith in Violet and Noah's story. Your engagement, your reflections, and your encouragement breathe life into tales like these. As you turn the final page, remember this: no matter where or how your own journey begins, there's always the potential for something extraordinary to blossom if you let your heart lead the way. With gratitude and love, the Mr. Peter Williams team.